that I am happy that you have chosen to spend some time with us, and looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts about self-efficacy. I'm going to skip past a couple of these because we've already made it that far in our conversation. So what we're talking about today, self-efficacy, hope, and resilience, is for some of you, for any of you that were at our summit in December, this topic was in kind of a thread through many of our presentations. And at our closing keynote with Dr. Richardson Love, we had a really great conversation about a hope framework, and he provided to us some tools that I'm going to share with you today, that we really wanted to make sure we spent some time having conversation in community with others. So looking here, talking about what is self-efficacy, starting with the kind of definition of it from the person who sort of put it forward initially, Albert Bandura, speaking of it in terms of an individual's belief in their capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce specific performance, right? Kind of a wordy way to define self-efficacy, of course, but we're going to get into sort of what builds self-efficacy. And I find that that's a better way for me to understand what it is when I think about what goes into it. But it is a foundation, right, for motivation, well-being, and personal accomplishment. And it's deeply connected to resilience. And I think when we look at what goes into self-efficacy, we'll start to understand that high self-efficacy, more often than not, is going to lead to high resilience and high resilience behavior. It impacts our habits and achievement, but it's different than self-esteem, right? So self-efficacy is going to focus on capability, whereas self-esteem is going to be related to your overall self-worth. So having a high self-efficacy and having strong feelings about being very capable is going to obviously impact your self-esteem, but self-esteem is sort of broader and overall self-worth. The interesting thing to me about self-efficacy is that it increases through lived experience. And I love that. It's not just a concept that we read about and learn about. It's that even if you aren't aware of what self-efficacy is, you're going to be building it through your lived experience. Also, I just am going to pause for a minute because I just got a warning that my headphones are going to die. So I'm going to have to stand up and go grab my AirPods because I didn't even check my battery. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Thanks for your patience. I will be switching headphones in a moment. So through our lived experience and increasing self-efficacy, it's kind of based on these four things: our performance accomplishments, our vicarious experience, verbal persuasion, and emotions, right? So whether we're having positive or negative experience in our performance, whether we're seeing others accomplish goals and help us believe, that kind of helps us believe that maybe we could do similar, have similar outcomes, especially if the vicarious experience is with people that are like us in our community, right? Encouragement from others, like an adult, coach or teacher for kiddos, or for us in our peer groups, encouragement from people that we spend a lot of time with, whether that's coworkers or in community groups. And then our emotions, whether we're feeling stressed or anxious, or whether we have positive experiences coping with stress. So I'm going to stop right there for a minute. Whoops, going the wrong way. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment because I want to pause and have conversation about sort of how we see this play out and how we are building our own self-efficacy, and which one of these. I want you to kind of look at these for a minute before I stop sharing, because I want to talk about which one you feel like you have most in your life. So we do have some like share out at the end, but I want to stop a couple times and have conversation as well about what we're seeing, and also give myself a chance to change these stupid headphones. So what do you think about self-efficacy and those four areas where you see it built? How do you see that show up in the work that you do, in the communities that you're a part of?
And I put that's the
Thank you for putting those in the
yeah, in
chat.
the chat so that way you can see it.
Here we go. I'm back. Can you guys hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. What you got?
Oh, just making sure you can hear me.
Oh, thanks. Oh, thanks. So, performance accomplishment, vicarious experience, verbal persuasion, and emotions. Sort of where do you see these showing up the most in the communities that you work in?
I'm happy to share. Hi, Andy Fetzner.
Hi, Andy.
I think, hi. I talk about this a lot, is like this idea of like we talk about representation mattering. And until I saw like a woman working, I grew up, my mom like didn't work. She was like a stay-at-home mom. And like understanding that that was a thing that could happen, like kind of put that in my template of like, and then also, when I do timelines as a therapist, we do the trauma timeline, but when we do like a resilience timeline, like ask the strengths-based questions of like, how did you get through that? I think that tends to pivot people's perspective of like that performance accomplishment idea of like, oh my God, I've gotten through this. Like, this is how I got through this. These are the skills and these are the emotions, and I survived them. I think that might kind of fit in this paradigm. I really really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And you thinking about it in terms of, like you said, a resilience timeline kind of captures all of those things, right? Because you're looking at what you've done, you're looking at what you've seen other people do and how they have handled things. You're getting encouragement and you're talking about the emotions, right? So I think that that point of representation and the vicarious experience, while you can gain a lot from seeing that from anyone, seeing it in people that you feel like you have a connection to or that are similar to you, I think amplifies the ability of that vicarious experience to be really meaningful. So let's jump back in to our slides and talk about hope and how we can think about this in terms of hope. So when we look at the lived experience, right, that is contributing to self-efficacy, it obviously makes a lot of hope and it's or a lot of sense. And it's not a big step to then see that having a high self-efficacy is going to correlate to being really resilient, right? So Dr. Rick Snyder wrote, and he's written a book about hope and hope theory, where he's defining hope as a positive cognitive process in which a person has goal-directed thinking that uses both pathways and agency. And through this definition and the way he posits his definition, he's come up with a way in which we can measure hope. We can define it and we can measure it. So we're going to think of hope in this way. So this is where we have the goal-directed behavior, right? So we have a goal, that's our destination. And then the intersection of that goal-directed behavior, our agency, and the pathways that we have, all three of those things, where they intersect is what gives us hope. So agency in this conversation is the fuel and the tools, right? So this is our motivation. This is why we want this goal, our destination. And then our pathways, that's the route that we can take. How am I going to get there? What are the steps that I need to take to accomplish the thing that I want to accomplish? So, agency, the driving force of hope, the mental determination and commitment. Our previous history of achieving goals is a factor in our agency. That's also a big part of self efficacy. Have I been able to do this in the past, right? Do I know anyone that has done this in the past? And then the emotion part of self efficacy also plays a role in here. The ability to have that mental energy to overcome and achieve in stressful times. And if we're thinking of agency as the motivation and fuel, we also have to think about um, how do we maintain that if we get stressed out or if we're feeling stress or anxiety. So, kind of keeping that consistent motivation. And then when we talk about pathways and the hope theory, we're talking about the plans that guide us to, right? And almost the plan that guide that hopeful thought of I can achieve this. And a really big part, I think one of the most critical parts of pathways is if you can generate multiple routes towards success. What happens if I hit this obstacle? For me, the way I think about that is in the planning for an obstacle, right? If I haven't accomplished this in 6 months, what is going to be the thing that derails me, right? Having that conversation ahead of time and thinking about obstacles and blocks in our route. And then a pathway is also based, same as self-efficacy, right? Based on a previous history of being able to find the different pathways or get past the obstacles that we have. I'm going to pause here for just a minute so everyone can capture this, because the thing that Dr. Schneider kind of has recognized is that we can measure hope. And this QR code is going to take you to a folder with a bunch of different information. There's two folders in here. One is the hope measurement tools, and the other is a huge amount of research on cultivating hope and why hope is important. Under the hope measures, there's two different scales, one for children and one for adults. When you go through and you provide this measurement tool to someone or use it for yourself, you're rating yourself on all of these different traits, thoughts, beliefs about yourself. They're identified as which ones go towards pathways, which one go towards agency. So in this way, hope is extremely measurable. And you can sit with an individual, you can sit with yourself and say, where do I need more support? Do I need more support in the pathway? Do I need more support in the agency area? Right? That gives us an entry point for conversation and for building support with people that we serve and people that we're in community with, and that for a lot of you, your clients that you're working with, right? Being able to measure hope is, I love that it's measurable, right? And I love a resource and a tool that shows me exactly what I need so that I can be really efficient, right? In a very type A way with my learnings and with my outcomes. I think self-efficacy. So let's talk about this for a minute. And I'm going to kind of go through this and then I'm going to come off share so that we can have conversation about this. And I can also open up and share one of the measurement tools so we can look at it for this conversation. Self-efficacy and resilience are deeply connected, right? We can measure agency and pathways. So I want to have a broad conversation about how can we operationalize this, the measurement tools, and whether we're thinking about what ways do we have to support the pathway piece of this, what ways do we have to support the agency piece of this. So I want to open that up for conversation. And while we do that, I'm going to open one of these scales so that we can talk about it in that way. I see in the chat that we're talking about whether these are usable. These are usable for anyone. They don't have to be licensed. Dr. Richardson Love linked us to them, but they're coming from a couple different areas and available for use. So how do we think about different ways we can support pathways, agency, or do we have clients and people that we work with that even struggle to think of the goals and the goal directed behavior? I'm working on downloading this. I'm going to share the adult hope scale, probably. Whoops. Probably not. Whoops. I can do this. While I get ready to share this, does anyone have experience with this? Thoughts about how you can use this?
I think it was a
Okay,
good call out to talk about the multiple pathways and having like different route ideas of how to get there, like after like 6 months, because I think a lot of times goal pathways, we get so focused on just the one pathway and coming up with different ways to make that a solution, that one pathway a solution instead of being like, well, maybe that's not the right pathway at all. So I thought that was a good call out.
yeah, and like we're the most expert in our own experience, right? And if you ask me, okay, I have this goal, and you ask me at the time I set it, if you don't accomplish this, what's going to be your obstacle? I'll know, right? We kind of know very often where we struggled with something previously, or what kind of will hinder us. So I'm hoping you can all see the adult pathway, or I'm sorry, the adult hope scale that I've pulled up here. So you could see when you're using this, you're rating yourself from definitely true all the way to definitely false. And it's a really detailed scale, right? It has a lot of area to kind of define precisely how you feel, even to the slightly, somewhat, mostly, right? And at the bottom here in the scoring, it's lining out for you which ones make up the agency subscale and which ones are making up the pathway subscale. So the agency path scale, let's kind of talk through that one first, with where we're looking at numbers 2, 9, 10, and 12. So energetically pursuing my goals. My past experience have prepared me well for my future. I've been pretty successful in life, and I meet the goals that I set for myself. So these are the agency. This is where we're measuring how much motivation, how much fuel do you have in your car to follow the map, right, that you have set out for yourself. So if someone's rating themselves really low on these, let's just talk about agency first. If you are working with someone and you see, okay, we're struggling with agency, what are some tools and thoughts about how we can increase just the agency piece of this? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so we can have conversation face to face with each other. And thinking about it in terms of what self-efficacy is, right? And how we're building self-efficacy through accomplishment, experience, persuasion, and emotion. How are we going to use those tools to build up the motivation and the agency? I'm reading through the chat as well right now.
I had an idea. I think that this would be a great tool to use with staff, right? Especially now in education. And I don't know
Yeah.
about mental health field, but in education, everyone's worried about whether they're going to have a job next year because of funding, Title I cuts, all of those types of things. So using this hope scale with them, so whatever happens, right? Like we're gonna hope actually that there is funding, correct? But if there's not funding, like what else? Where do you lie on this scale, and how could that help you in really challenging times? And then when you're also working with kids, right? Because we always train and we always talk about you can't help others if you're not helping yourself. So if you are really, really low on some of these areas, might that be something that they focus on to build up so that they can better help the people that they're serving?
Yeah, absolutely, Cindy. Thank you for sharing that. This is almost like which one comes first, right? Do we think about, do we need the motivation to get the pathway? Do we need the pathway to have the motivation, right? But in terms of what you just said, the first thing that came to my mind is because I'm spending a lot of time in schools right now, right? Where the motivation is so hard, right? Because this agency piece of how much energy do I have to keep going and keep showing up all of the time? Because I just sincerely, and as we've seen in the chat, this is an issue in every other field as well that is here today, healthcare and mental health, is how do I keep going forward when I have no idea, right? The pathway that I am on, that I have been on, that I keep myself motivated for, I don't know if it's going to exist anymore. And that's kind of what made me think about what, these obviously intersect and play into each other. But without the motivation, it's hard to be on the pathway. Without the pathway, it's hard to be motivated, and it's hard to know which to address first, or do they always have to be in unison? But thinking about using this for your staff, I think, is a fantastic idea to try and understand. And because the questions kind of touch a couple different places of motivation, which is another reason why I really enjoy this scale and think and find it's very operational, is motivation shows up in many different ways, right? And it touches us all differently. I'm going to go back to looking at it again so we can look at these different, what are the different ways I can energetically pursue my goals. My past experience has prepared me well. I've been successful, and I meet the goals that I set myself. Those are very different ways of motivation. So I love the way that you're thinking about that in the staff terms of, all right, if you're not feeling motivated halfway through the school year, where can we look at building this up and being supportive in that way? I'm going to shift to pathways unless anyone wants to add anything to that.
Before you shift, I think it's good to note here that it is that when having these conversations with anyone, acknowledging the fact of just how hard everything is right now, and that we all feel the collective weight of continuing to experience life. Life is definitely lifing. There hasn't been a break in kind of honestly since COVID hit, right? As this kind of large things, there's always been very large scale things, whether it is on the global front or whether it is on, just our national front. The media and the news and things like that are set for that kind of instantaneous, let's just continue to bombard our brains, and let's think of the worst case scenarios in all of those. And so knowing that the messages that are coming out and that people are receiving, it can feel very heavy, and that's very hard, right? It kind of goes to the comment in the chat as well, as when we are looking, when we're looking at using this, say with clients or with others who have experienced trauma, if we don't have that regulation, it's very hard, we can't, it's not as easy to come to this from that limbic part and the emotional part, right? That emotional piece does play a part in all of this, in accessing our hope, right? Because there are good emotions also that help us help fuel the hopes. I loved that Andy brought up our resilience timeline. I don't think we hear of that very often, right? Like, especially in that space of looking at that kind of strength space perspective of, we all have, if we look at these scales, or if your clients are looking at these scales and they're like, I don't have any of this. Is that really true? Because you're here and you're sitting with us, right? It might be hard to access that information, but that information is there, right? So like, how can we get into a place that we can actually see the resilience that is currently there? Because if we're here and if we're showing up with another person, we have resilience, right? And even just having that conversation that resilience isn't just there, and resilience is a byproduct of adversity. And so, yeah, we've been through things. That's what's created resilience. That's why you're still here and doing it. Michelle, did you have a comment, question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this dovetails really well with an intentional practice that I have with my staff, which is strength-based supervision, where we meet weekly. Doesn't have to be long meetings. I have a smaller staff, and what we are doing is a lot of in the trenches kind of work with many vulnerable populations out in the community. And just as you're saying, and there's a lot of concern around safety. There's a lot of concern around um, care for people feeling kind of helpless with things that might be spiraling all around us. So intentionally holding space to be able to talk openly about those things that are difficult while at the same time following a structure that reminds people what are they doing that is going well. Because even in the midst of things that are difficult, there are things that are going well. And I think the consistent way that we can, as people who are supporting staff, show up from a regulated place and remind people where their strength lies, where that resilience lies on a regular basis has been really pretty incredible for my small team. And they have voiced feeling empowered by being able to show up in the spaces where they can and promote healing. But it doesn't come without intentional conversation around success and also giving yourself permission to ask for support, which is kind of that structure of it. So it's really is a tool that I'd love to use actually with my staff because we've talked about some of these things, but I think the more insight they can have, the better. So thanks for sharing all this.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. I mean, I love a good survey. I love a good data tool. So I was equally excited about this when I saw it the first time. So I love that we're not only thinking about it in terms of, clients and the communities we serve, but also our staff and ourselves as well. So thank you for sharing that. I saw another hand up.
Ruth.
Ruth.
Yeah, I work with the women in the mental health units in the prison, and we're doing trauma informed sessions with them. And one of the things I was thinking about for them is just the encouraging them in regards to not what they've done, but who they are, that they have intrinsic value because of who they are. And also sharing of success stories. I'm just thinking about anyone, whether in any environment. I'm even thinking about myself when I hear other people's success stories and how they made it. It's so encouraging to me, and it also generates maybe new ideas in my own mind. And so when someone, I was saying in the chat, creative problem solving is hard for some people. Like not everybody has the skill in creative problem solving to think of different ways to solve things. But when they hear other people's success stories, it can help generate those ideas for them and be very encouraging and motivating. And I know for me in my life, if I feel discouraged or I just feel lonely and I don't feel very motivated and then I feel overwhelmed with completing a major project or task. If I have a conversation with someone I love, my mom who lives far away, or a sister or a friend who really loves me, and just talking to them and feeling encouraged and having one person I feel close to and connected with, suddenly I feel loved, I feel encouraged, I feel re-energized, and I feel more capable of accomplishing whatever that goal might be in my own life. And I just feel that meaningful connections and encouragement goes a long way in giving people joy and energy and strength to accomplish a challenge.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I'm thinking about, I'm going to stop sharing so we can have like a better face-to-face conversation. But it's so like thinking about this in terms of the unit where you're doing work, right? Like that's such a isolated area to think about motivation and pathways. And yet it's still possible, right? There's still goals that you can have in that small area. There's motivation that you can gain from the people around you in that area and avenues to accomplish the things you want. And so I think it's really telling that this is applicable. We're talking about applying it right in mental health with clients, with our staff in a school, with inmates that are incarcerated. Like the broad areas that this is applicable is makes it such a good resource. Adrienne.
Well, you took the tool down, but
Oh, I'll pop it back up for you.
I'm curious. I like surveys too, but I also like the how and why and when questions that go. So is this often used as that, like, how have I been successful in life? When did I worry about my health? You know, how have my past experience prepared me for the future? Those are great talking pieces to pull from that. So I'm wondering if it's ever used in that format as well.
I'm sure it probably is. The way that, and I'd love for anyone else to chime in here as well. The way that I look at this is the conversation starter of do you need more support with agency? Do you need more support with pathway? And then a dive into, okay, if you need more support with one or the other, let's talk about when have you been able to do this before? Let's, right? Like the resilience timeline we're talking about, that's almost like proof. That's like proof that you have done this before. So let's look back and say, when have I been able to come up with a solution to this? Or when have I been able to motivate myself to get through something? So I view this, and that, I'd love to hear from anyone who thinks of this in broader or different terms as well. I view this as like the starting point of a conversation. How can we find the entry point to identify where you need some more support to feel hopeful, right? Because this is a hope measurement tool, which being able to be hopeful, particularly in the environments we're in right now, is a sign of resilience, first of all, right? So even being able to show up and think about hope in that way. But I view this as like the starting point of a conversation in order to have those deeper conversations you just mentioned, Adrienne.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Before we move on to pathways and away from agency, does anyone have anything they want to chime in or add to that piece of the conversation? Okay, so if you're typing in the chat, please keep typing. Let's shift to the 4 subscale categories here that make up pathways. So the 4 pathway parts are number 1, I can think of many ways to get out of a jam. This is like the first thing that comes to my mind is creative problem solving there that Ruth mentioned before. Number 4, there are a lot of ways around any problem. So that's just measuring that belief for this person. Is that definitely true all the way to definitely false? I think that's really telling, right? And a really good conversation piece is, do you believe that there are multiple routes to get to the same place? Number 6, I can think of many ways to get the things in life that are important to me. And number 8, even when others get discouraged, I know I can find a way to solve the problem. So this is a really good piece to think about the obstacle part of it, right? And the emotion and encouragement from others. So if I have this goal and maybe it's in concert with someone else or with a lot of feedback from someone else, when they get discouraged, I can keep going. And because this scale is so detailed and has so many levels to it, I think it really can help identify where someone is really, really at and help us build up the pros and cons of that particular belief. So shifting right into this pathway where we're really building the how to. I have the goal. I have the motivation maybe, and now we need to build the how am I going to do this? And what are my options? Which makes me think of a different concept that I teach often, the sense of coherence, which we can touch on in just a second. But I would love to hear from anyone um, that has any thoughts about the pathways piece of this. And while you're thinking
I
about
love
that,
that
I
somebody
can,
said talking
yeah, go
about
ahead, go.
showing up where we can. And I think like if we talk about redefining success not as the outcome of achieving the goal, but rather like learning from each iteration of each process. I think sometimes we can think of like success is like I'm successful when I have housing for a year. Well, if you filled out the paperwork, maybe that's the success. If you showed up today, that's once like it, so just pivoting from, this idea of goals and success can feel so overwhelming and abstract. And getting into the process, maybe because I'm a therapist, I love that stuff. Getting into the process. And then I also think about like hope versus what's the opposite of that hopelessness, right? Or like learned helplessness, which I would imagine in a prison setting. I have family and friends and professional people, who've been in that environment, and it's learned help. It is the outcome of that is learned helplessness, like just by design. And so, it can be really challenging to turn that on its head and find those little glimmers, and then like normalizing that, of course, you're not feeling powerful, or of course, you're not feeling whatever because of this environment, and what can we learn from this environment, like that environment does this, so how can we get you to a place where the environment and you surround yourself with people who are like building you up, and we work on that client level.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about thinking about success in terms of accomplishing the steps on the way there instead of accomplishing the full thing, because it's like very often not getting something teaches us a lot of lessons, right? So not accomplishing a goal oftentimes can teach us so much. And so if we're looking at each step along the way as being the resilience building, and whether or not we get the goal, it just kind of is, that's where some of the lessons are, is in the steps that get us there. It's kind of almost like turning it upside down. And because this is, self-efficacy is based on that lived experience, we've got to identify where we're being successful in the steps on the way to something, right? And it's a great reminder of where we actually have control and what is within, right, our locus of control, and accomplishing the steps along the way, right? That's a big piece of that. So I mentioned sense of coherence. This is something that, we've been talking about a lot within the consortium and also at a lot of the trainings that I do. And I think pathways and thinking about pathways really intersects very well with the sense of coherence, which is this idea. It's sort of like this approach to, I think of it as approach to problem solving, where we have three different questions that we can ask ourselves or individuals that we're working with to identify where we need support. So this is like if pathways is a subscale of hope and the measurement tool, sense of coherence is almost like a subset of questions that help us identify even deeper in the pathways. And those questions are, first of all, do I understand what the issue is, right? Do I understand? So think about this in terms of either pathways or agency. Do I understand why not having resilience or not knowing my agency or pathway is an issue and how that's impeding me, right? And if I do understand that, the next step is, do I understand what my resources are? Where do I have resources? Who are my resources to build up my sense of agency or the pathway that I want to take, right? And if I have that, the next step is, do I understand how this is impacting my full life? Do I understand how this is impactful to how I feel, where I'm going, what I do, who I'm with? So, using sort of these two tools together, right? The hope measurement with pathways and agency, and using the questions that come from the sense of coherence to layer on top of that can really give us a clear picture or some clarity of what we need to do to build up this different piece of resilience, depending on which part of the measurement that we're looking at. Yes, we have in the chat a conversation about stoicism, talking about what we have control over. Total big props to Ryan Holiday as well. That is my go-to person for stoicism as well. And taking action is enough. Taking action, whether it gets us the success or the spot that we think we want to be, those are two different things, right? There's the action and the result, and taking action. This is something, actually, speaking of Ryan Holiday, that he says all of the time: mood follows action, right? And so taking that action is building up some of those feelings that go into self-efficacy and the sense of resilience. Any additional thoughts on pathways, agency, measuring hope? How are we going to use this tool? I'm going to use it on myself. I'm going to be filling out some of this on my own and thinking about it for myself, right? Before I even deploy it with anyone that I work with. Any closing thoughts? Do we have the QR code? Let me see if I can grab it and throw it in the chat really quickly in case we need that. Okay. Whoop.
Are you talking about the link to the Google folder?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
Oh,
I think everyone's got it. But also,
yeah.
If you want to be able to use that QR code, definitely feel free to download that. Angie has also just put in the chat a link to our YouTube channel page, whatever the kids call it, so that you have access to whatever it is. So that you have access to our previous communities of practice, future communities of practice. We have so much there. There's also a link to where that QR code takes you that you can save as well.
If you're
that is what I have for you. It's
if your life
turn.
isn't QR friendly, like mine, or you need it on your computer, I like direct links. I might be old. It's
Yeah.
okay. I have no problem.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I understand.
I learned how to last year, though, use a QR code for the first time.
Oh, I'm so proud
I
of
know,
you.
right? Like I can do it myself now, and I taught my husband how to use a QR code, which honestly is that's the big piece.
Talk about hope and
That's the big
resilience.
piece. And could do some self-efficacy there. You have done this before. You can do this again.
Yes. Yes.
I have some faith in you.
We need to see the menu, so we need to be able to do this.
I love it. We part of the reason that Jaylene and I chose this topic for our mental health and well-being COP this year is one, after participating in the summit, it was like, oh, that's a different way to think of some of these things, right? And the world is heavy right now, and to say that it is not is not valid, right? It's hard to be in our industry. It's always hard to be in our industry, right? Like mental health, well-being, that's never been an easy industry to be in. A lot of us work with people who are actively in adversity. Not only have they experienced it, but they're actively in that space. And so we have lots of conversations, right, of how do we keep how do we keep ourselves full and ourselves regulated in this space, and we just have increasingly had this conversation over the last 5 years of just how much harder it is, right? COVID changed everything. Nothing will ever be the same since then. It has taught us a lot of things and has given us a lot of resilience, right? In those spaces. And kind of wanted to remind us not only of, how powerful the work that we do is, but literally how powerful you all are showing up in this space. A lot of times you all are the pathway for them, right? To be able to access that hope. And it's the hope that you all are holding that gives others the hope, right? That vicarious experiences that Jaylene had, put a lot of times that's the experiences that they're having with you, right? And you being able to hold that space. And so really wanted to honor that before we let you go. And I know that in your calendars we have you blocked off for 2 hours. So that means you have to at least, I'm not asking for the full hour, that's a lot to ask for. But I at least ask for you to take 20 minutes because that only takes you to 11:15, and take that 20 minutes for yourself to fill it up the way that you need to just kind of recharge before you go back into your workspace. So thank you all for being here. We're always here for you if you need anything. And we will look forward to seeing you at our next one.
Thank you, everyone.